Okay, so that's the end of the show from my perspective. Do you guys have any questions, comments? Yeah.
What if your business model is inherently not a retention, repeat business model?
Then
Does a lot of that stuff just kind of get simplified, or does it mean when the startup doesn't?
No. It gets simplified, but also then, especially in a model where it's a one-off transaction, you need referral, right? Because your what's called viral coefficient needs to be greater than 1, so that every person that you get needs to tell more than one person on average, right? Or your business will fail because it costs way too much for you to acquire customers. So you would use this same technique also to drive people through your sales process, but also to make sure that they're doing those referrals by making it really, really easy and tracking whether or not they do that. So you get a high virality. Does that make sense?
What if you never plan to charge?
If you never plan to charge, you're probably stealing credit card numbers. Who pays for your site?
I don't know, like Twitter or Facebook. So if you're a traffic-driven operation.
Right. So Twitter or Facebook. I mean, whenever somebody comes to me and tells me these ideas like Twitter and Facebook, no one will fund you. I mean, you have to have something that's so brilliant. It's just really, really hard to get that because they're basically an advertising-based model is what they really are. So it's really, really hard right now to make any. I mean, it used to be like 2 years ago, everybody would fund all this premium stuff. Nobody will do it now. Because and the examples that weren't back then weren't Twitter and Facebook. They were Evernote, and companies that were actually making real money. Twitter and Facebook make money in the secondary markets, like they trade all their shares behind the wall. I'm just saying it'll be really, really hard. So if you're doing that, don't you need to though make sure that those people are sticky? Because eventually you have to monetize this somehow. It's just gonna be. I mean, I always suggest that when you're way back at the business canvas stage, you have to figure out how you derive revenue, because you're dependent then on the capital markets believing whatever story that you tell them to keep funding the stuff, and that doesn't work for a lot of companies. Because for every Twitter or Facebook, there's 100,000 guys laying dead on the side of the road who never made it because they couldn't figure out how to fund the company.
I think what you said though applies to even if you have an ad-based model, everything that you said still applies. I've worked for big publishers and they do have the funnel of how many people are coming back, how many are sticking, how many pages are they looking at, how do we increase those amounts. So it still applies whether they're spending money or advertising. So I think to your question, you still have to do this to get them to come back.
That's correct. And by the way, this stuff I showed you is what all the big companies do. Yeah. I just show you how to apply this to a startup.
You had a lot of good charts and diagrams. Are you going to be able to publish this?
Yeah, we will. We'll put this up both on the site and we'll put it on SlideShare. So you'll get a link tomorrow. All this stuff will be there so that you don't need to worry about all these links and all that. I'll put it up in the morning.
You mentioned Grubhub a few times with the cohort analysis that they did. So I would assume that you're talking about the users who were actually ordering food online for their analysis as opposed to the restaurants that were using your service. Or do they do both?
Both.
Both.
See, in an n-sided market, you need to measure every single side. Right? So in an n-sided market, you always have the buyers and the sellers. Sometimes you have distributors and sometimes you have sponsors. And you get even more complicated than that, but that's usually 4 sides is enough. And you need to measure them all. Because in an n-sided, or what's called network effect, the more people that you have, like the more restaurants that you have, the more likely someone is to use Grubhub. The more people who use Grubhub, the more likely a restaurant is to list on Grubhub, right? So it's an n-sided market. So you need to measure both of that to make sure that they're both growing. It's far more complex. So that's why I always help somebody when they tell me that they're an n-sided market to realize it's not twice as hard. It's square. It's exponentially hard. And every time that you add another facet, like in a 4-sided market, it's a lot more complex to pull that off. You can do it, but you need all those people. It's chicken and egg and all that. You need to get everybody there in order for it to be valuable. Well, all the way in the back, and no, all right.
I'm in a media industry, and I was just gonna ask you like a broad question. In 10 years, do you think that it'll be like a sponsor-driven model, or like the user pay per like subscriber model that'll really take hold?
So just to give the question, she said that she's in the media industry, and she goes, in 10 years, do I think that it'll be a sponsor-driven model or a user-driven model? My answer is yes, and I'll I believe that, see, everything disrupts, changes, and all that. I mean, all content wants to be free, which typically is a sponsor-driven model. But there are people who don't want sponsors, so they're willing to pay not to have sponsors, which is the user-driven model. And that changes all the time. You know, it depends. Like things for academia, where they don't want. At the last company I was working for, we did work with associations. And some of the medical associations don't want pharma to sponsor things because they think it taints their science. So they're willing to pay a real lot of money for their content. Whereas everywhere else, they're like, you know, no, I'm not going to pay for the Wall Street Journal. You just give it to me, Wall Street Journal bags, New York Times, and just give it to me and throw in the advertising. I don't care, right? So it goes both ways. Some people want exclusivity, and you've got a pendulum effect because some people will pay. There are free sites that you can go to where you get all this advertising and people use them, but if you pay, you don't get the advertising, and there are people who pay. So it works both ways. It just depends on the level of irritation. You know, it's the best answer. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer than that, but I think it'll always be that way. Yeah.
Just curious, what is your background? You just didn't read a book and...
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I've been in the Chicago community for about 25 years. I've worked for some pretty big companies, all the way from the side of like GE to startups that I started myself. I've had 4. I failed miserably once, sold 2 of them, and went public as part of Divine in another one. So, which was a failure at the end of the day. I've worked with big companies like GE, bringing products to market. I'm a product guy. I mean, that's all I do. I mean, it's pretty much, I've done other stuff. One time I spent a stint as a CIO, and I wanted to pull my teeth out. It was like the worst idea I ever did to go around the other side of the desk. But like, I'm a software guy. I mean, that's what I do. I do marketing. I go into a market and figure out how to do it. I've screwed up a lot of things in my life, so that's where I really like learn a lot. You know, like failures because you can. Not just the company fails, but you can have a bad product launch. You can do like a lot of things where nobody does anything, but you're fortunate enough to get. A lot of the pivots happen, you know, like PayPal, they got all this money, right? And they were doing this encryption software in the handheld, and then they realized that didn't work. Well, they still had all this venture capital left over, so then they could pivot into something else. So sometimes it always works that way. So yeah, so I used to be the COO of Janier, which was a product development company out in Des Plaines back in the 90s, if you guys have heard of that. That's your question? I'm terrible at talking about myself, sorry.